Class, welcome to the A Brief History of Communication Studies, Rhetoric, and Public Speaking lecture video. As always, if you'd like to follow along with the PowerPoint, you can download it in the module. So I'd like to start our conversation by asking, when did you learn how to communicate in order to get what you want? Now, I don't just mean when did you learn how to communicate. Obviously, we as babies and as toddlers learn how to speak by listening to the language around us, mimicking our parents, our caretakers, etc. But did anyone ever sit you down and teach you how to argue? Generally, the response I get from students is that while they might have seen patterns from their parents or people in their family, this isn't really something that is ever taught, right? And I think that there's a really good example of this. Many of you have probably seen this video, but if not, I will play a minute of it.
Listen to me. Like I do this all the time. And if I go out at the house with the door, Matthew has his toys, and then Matthew has all his toys.
Okay, but I have to yell at you guys.
Linda, listen, Linda. Listen.
Okay, what?
Like everything they do at this house, you can't trust everything at Grandma's house.
Okay.
Okay, then what?
Then you're not listening to me.
Then you're not listening to me.
I asked you not to do something.
Linda, but listen to me. Look at, if we do something, if you get that bird thing off, you're gonna break it.
Okay, but I'm letting you know
But
that you cannot.
Linda, lick it.
You're not listening to me.
Linda,
Listen to me now. Listen to me now.
Listen to me.
No, you're not listening. I said no cupcakes, and you try to get cupcakes, and you try to ask Grandma.
Linda,
Didn't you?
Linda, lick it. If we do something without this, if you get close, you can't even get them. You're gonna burn your butt.
What's gonna burn your butt? You and Kevin don't listen, so I have to get both of.
Okay, so the video goes on and on as 3-year-old Mateo makes his case for cupcakes. And even though he's 3 and he is obviously adorable, he makes some pretty good arguments for his case, for his, his case to get more cupcakes. So he says, I do this all the time. Right? He's saying, like, I'm allowed to do this because we're allowed to have grandma's cupcakes at grandma's house all the time. He says, you can touch everything at grandma's house. Like, I'm not even in trouble. I didn't break any rules. If you take that thing off, you're going to break it. He tries to distract his accuser, which I'm assuming is his mother, by bringing up a completely separate issue. And then finally, he says, I'm going to get papows in the butt. That, if you continue to accuse me, I'm going to get punished for this. And that just isn't okay. This little boy is 3 years old. And yet he's making some very complex arguments here. These are all what we would consider to be argumentative strategies in which he's saying, I did not break any laws or any rules. You can't accuse me of this, otherwise I'm going to face unjust punishment. And I would argue that no one taught him to do this, that this is something that's inherent in us. This is something that you don't learn. It's who we are. It's what we do. As human beings, part of being a human being is expressing your ideas, is communicating and using that communication to get what you want, to fulfill your needs in life. It is one of the most basic parts of human nature. And the reason I like to start this lecture with that is because as we go through this course and we study communication and we study communication strategies and skills and techniques, I want everyone to have the confidence that this is who you are. Communicating and being a good communicator is what you've done your entire life. It's how you've gotten this far, right? This whole class is just about refining those skills, talking about them, strategizing with them. And so I just want you to remember that you are Mateo, or at least you once were, and that being a good communicator is something that you already are. It's just in this class, we're going to talk about how to become an even better communicator. So what is communication? Communication has been studied for thousands of years, obviously, because it is one of the things that makes human beings unique. It's one of the things that makes us human, our ability to communicate with one another. As an academic discipline, communication studies is the study of human interaction. Anything that humans use to communicate and interact with each other, that's what we study in communication studies. So in a public speaking course, we're going to be learning about written communication, verbal communication, and nonverbal communication as it pertains to speech giving. But communication studies, just as a discipline, as an area of study, looks at everything. It looks at text messages, street signs, TikToks, memes, clothing logos, anything that communicates a message is a form of communication and is therefore something we study in communication studies. Historical perspective. So Western society, our society, views kind of the inception, the beginning of the study of communication, the study of rhetoric and persuasion, and the study of public speaking in ancient Greece and Rome. Right? That's where what we call the classical era. And this is really the root of humanities, which is the study of human beings, right? So many of you might find overlap with other courses you've taken, such as philosophy classes, logic classes, ethics classes. You're going to hear a lot of names of philosophers that you might be familiar with. And that's because this is really a foundational period of human history in which people started to study things like communication, like public speaking and persuasion. So, the Greeks. In ancient Greece, they had a direct democracy, which meant that decisions made by their government were made by the people. They were made by a council or a committee of citizens, which were exclusively wealthy, land-owning men, so not exactly a full representation of the society, but they would vote on things to do in their nation. That's what a direct democracy is. It's by the people, for the people, etc., which necessitated rhetoric, or the development for effective argumentation and speech construction and delivery, right? Because if you were going to make a case to these voting members, if you were going to communicate a new law that needed to be passed, something that you needed, etc., you needed to have those skills. And most people living in ancient Greece didn't have those skills. Unless you were part of the very wealthy elite or educated, you were illiterate, you were uneducated, and you were therefore pretty disenfranchised from society. You didn't have access to benefit from your government if you weren't able to interact with it. If you were a poor farmer who had never learned how to formally speak or communicate, it would be very difficult for you to advocate for yourself in front of your government, right? And persuade people that you needed more land to grow more crops or something like that. And so a group of educators known as the sophists identified this problem and said, we want to teach people how to be better communicators. We want to teach people how to speak well, how to present themselves well, how to communicate well. We want to teach people how to get what they want in society using communication. And so they began traveling through Greece, selling their services as teachers. Their pitch was, we're going to teach you how to use communication to convince people to do something so you can get what you want from your society. And not everybody liked that. One of the most renowned philosophers of all time, probably the most famous philosopher of all time, Plato, discouraged sophist use of rhetoric or teaching persuasion and claimed that ultimately it contributed to the fall of Athens, the fall of Greece. And the reason he believed this is because he said, you're not teaching people how to be good communicators, you're teaching people how to manipulate. If your goal is to teach someone how to convince their audience to do something, that's not admirable. That's not ethical. His true critique was that it was an unethical practice because ultimately you're giving people the power to persuade people to do something that could be harmful or could be selfish or something like that. And he thought it interfered with the pursuit of truth, which for anyone who has studied Plato, capital T truth, that was the ultimate for him, pursuing truth about the universe. Which brings up an interesting question, because I believe there is a fine line between persuasion, which is arguably what rhetoric is supposed to be, right? How to persuade people, how to communicate an idea so that people will listen and agree with you and adopt that idea, and manipulation. I think the difference is the intention, the ethics that are underneath it. Are you doing this for good or for evil? Are you trying to convince people to help themselves? Or are you trying to convince people to hurt themselves? When we talk about famous rhetoricians, famous speakers throughout history, I would argue one of the most famous and powerful speakers of all time is Martin Luther King. Right? He was able to use his voice, his talents as a speaker to shape and move and change an entire generation. Someone else who was able to do that with the same skill set was Adolf Hitler. Both men are revered and, well, I shouldn't say revered. Both men are known for their power as speakers. Adolf Hitler at the time was revered for his ability to move a crowd, for his ability to get people amped up, to hype people up and believe in something, right? He was speaking to Germany when they were a crippled nation, when they were experiencing great economic loss after World War I. And he got them to believe in their nation again. And he did so in a way that, I mean, it speaks for itself, created one of the greatest atrocities in human history. And he did that with the power of rhetoric. So that's where this double bind comes in. Is it ethical to teach people how to persuade people if you don't know how people are going to use that power? With great power, with great rhetoric and public speaking skills comes great responsibility. Fortunately, Aristotle, who was a student of Plato but also worked with the Sophists, came up with a happy medium. He said, okay, I can see where Plato's coming from. I understand the ethical concerns. It should not be used to manipulate or to lead people astray down the wrong path, lead them to believe something that could hurt them or other people. But if it's used ethically to persuade people for good, to persuade people in a way that's going to help make a society better, that's going to, use shared cultural knowledge and values to help us move forward as a society, then that is something that is worth teaching. That is something that is helpful and valuable to us if we can teach people how to communicate for the betterment of society. So Aristotle gave the official definition of rhetoric, the definition we'll be using for this class, which is the art of discovering means of persuasion available for any occasion. Essentially what that means is it's the art of being a good speaker, a good communicator, the art of looking at the situation at hand, when, what you're needing to communicate, to whom, what are the environmental factors that are dealing with this, what's going on in society at the time, taking all of those things into account and saying, what's the best way that I can communicate this message to get people to understand what's going on and help us move forward? That is rhetoric. Aristotle firmly believed that part of being a good communicator or speaker or rhetorician is being an ethical speaker, because that is the difference. That is why, with great power comes great responsibility. Becoming a good speaker also means being an ethical speaker, so that you're never lying to your audience or making them believe something that's hurtful for them. So he also came up with 3 elements of rhetoric. You might have heard of these before, known as the artistic proofs. These are what he believed, how you could kind of break rhetoric down in terms of different elements of persuasion. The first is logos, which essentially just refers to the logic of the message. This is the use of data, of evidence, of, reasoning with your audience to get them to believe something. Next is ethos, the credibility of the speaker, appealing to your credibility as a speaker in order to get your audience to trust the information that you are presenting to them. For instance, if you were a medical doctor and you were trying to persuade your audience to do something that's good for their health, you could appeal to your credibility, to your ethos by saying, listen, I'm a licensed medical professional. I understand all of the science behind these issues, and this is why you can trust me when I say you need to do XYZ for your health. And then finally, pathos, which is an emotional appeal. This is when you are pulling at people's heartstrings. You're appealing to their compassion, to the things that make us human. If you were trying to persuade people to pass a law and you were saying, you know, this law will ensure that no one is ever wronged or that justice is served because no person deserves to be treated in an unfair way or something like that. And you're rallying that sense of human compassion. That is the use of pathos, an emotional appeal. Cicero is a Roman philosopher who studied communication as well. He built upon Aristotle's work and developed the 5 canons of rhetoric. These are essentially, just like I said, building upon Aristotle. These are elements that he believed made good communication, good public speaking, good rhetoric. And these are first, invention. That's a fancy way to say, have a good idea. Have something important to communicate to your audience. The second is arrangement. Make sure it's structured well and clearly so that it's easy for your audience to follow. Style. Make sure that there's flair in the writing and the word choice so that it's interesting and entertaining for your audience. Memory. This is kind of controversial because I know that many of you were thrilled when you found out that your speech didn't have to be memorized, but let me explain. Cicero believed that if you were reading from a script, it came off as less genuine than if you were speaking from the heart, right? And that it also affected your credibility as a speaker. Think of this. If we were in a regular classroom and you walked into the classroom and I'm giving a lecture, and instead of just, you know, referencing the PowerPoint and talking to you as I'm doing right now in this video, I had my phone and was reading from my phone the entire time while I lectured. Yeah, so Cicero was a Roman philosopher, and he built upon Aristotle's work and developed the 5 canons of rhetoric, and they are as follows. The first one is invention, which means, what kind of instructor would you think I was? Probably not a very good one. Right? One of the reasons that I am your instructor, that I'm part of the faculty here at Moorpark, is because communication studies is what I am an expert in. I'm a communication scholar. I have degrees in communication, which makes me qualified to speak on these topics because I know them like the back of my hand, because I've been teaching them and studying them for so long. That's why when I'm giving this lecture in a classroom or even now with the video, I might use little bullet points on the slides to spark my memory, but I don't need to read from something because I am credible when it comes to communication studies. I would not be credible teaching a math class. You wouldn't want me doing anything but reading directly from a textbook because otherwise I would definitely stray my audience down the wrong path. But that's why memory or memorization was important to Cicero. That's why we use extemporaneous delivery in this class, because you are much more likely to be well perceived by your audience if they trust you because you're speaking from the heart. If you're reading directly from your note cards, all that tells your audience is you don't know anything you're talking about. The last canon of rhetoric is delivery, which refers to delivery style and emotion and tone and hand gestures, postures, facial expressions, all of the things that we're going to be working on for the rest of the semester. So that was your quick and dirty rundown of kind of a summary of communication studies, rhetoric, and public speaking. Where did this all start? And these are all concepts that we're going to be using throughout the entire semester and building upon them. This idea that as speakers, it is our ethical responsibility to make sure that we're giving our audience good information that will help better them as a society. And, you know, using a good balance of ethos, pathos, and logos to make sure that our messages are well crafted and persuasive, but also ethical.